Welcome to the Wealth is in the Details podcast. In this podcast, financial planner Peter Raskin helps families and business owners understand and prepare for their wealth journey. Along the way, thoughtful and detailed planning can provide clarity and confidence as clients confront a multitude of financial decisions. Listen in as Peter shares stories and insight into people's wealth journeys. Now, let's get into today's podcast.
Hello and welcome to
Wealth is in the Details podcast
with Peter Raskin from Raskin Planning Group. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Eric. It feels like summer is is quite full now, and real happy that it's here. We've had glorious weather where we are in the Boston area, so it's just been perfect.
Well,
So
I've been to Boston. It's beautiful. I know that the weather has been gorgeous. Here it's just hot and nasty. So I'm jealous, but I'm glad that your summer's going well. I know for this podcast, you actually brought a guest on today. Who'd you bring on?
Leslie Jackson.
Nice.
And I'm real excited about what we'll be talking about. She's a nutritionist. And so I think this is right in line with wellness. You know, over the past 85 podcasts we've done, give or take some, you know, we've really focused on wellness, and there's lots of different aspects to wellness. There's certainly financial wellness, and we've certainly had those topics.
Mm-hmm.
There's emotional wellness. There's, I think of being well from a spiritual perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's physical wellness. And that's where I think some of the focus will be today, on the physical wellness aspects of our world and our life. And I'm real excited to hear what Leslie has to say.
Yeah, me too. As long as there's no, you can't eat peppermint ice cream in this podcast, then I'm going to be just fine.
Well, we'll have to hear from Leslie.
All right.
See what she has to say.
Sounds good.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure.
So you're a nutritionist, and I always like to start off these conversations with kind of understanding your journey. You know, why nutrition and diet, and what do you do, and how do you work?
Sure. And I'll just address the peppermint ice cream question right up front. I will never tell you that you can't have peppermint ice cream or ice cream of any kind for that matter.
Woo-hoo.
So you're safe.
All right. I like you. All right. This is good.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks so much, Peter. And I'm really excited to be here. I will say that my journey to what I'm doing now has been somewhat circuitous, I guess. I, went to college undergrad and thought I wanted to be an art historian. And now I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. So it's, I've gone on quite a path, but I'd say that I, was always drawn to nutrition just from playing sports and, doing athletic endeavors that required me to fuel my body for nutrition, for performance from the time I was in high school. I originally went to grad school for nutrition thinking that it would be really rewarding to work with people one-on-one and to help them kind of navigate the world of nutrition. I had been working at a gym and, kind of in my after college haze of not really being 100% sure what I wanted to do. And I was working in a gym with clients, and most of their questions were around nutrition. And I realized I was woefully unprepared and also, untrained to answer their questions. And so that's what originally got me interested in nutrition and going back to graduate school for nutrition. What I found when I got to graduate school was that there were so many work possibilities for me, and that I was interested in so many different aspects of what I could do when I originally got out of grad school. So when you're in grad school for nutrition, it's really very medically focused, I should say. So you're really working and focusing on medical nutrition therapy, which means caring for patients that have acute disease states. So what is the medical nutrition therapy for someone with diabetes? What is the medical nutrition therapy for someone with liver, kidney failure, et cetera? So when I got out of grad school, my first job was in a hospital, and I worked as part of the medical team, working with people who were admitted, who had really, who were really very ill and being part of the care team to make sure that their treatment and their stay in the hospital went as smoothly as possible from a nutrition standpoint. And then it was really exciting. It was a lot. It was very fast paced. I would be seeing lots of patients during the day, and I learned a lot and was able to put all of the stuff that I had freshly learned in grad school into practice. And so that was wonderful. That is a very fast paced, demanding life. And so as I got a little older and my husband and I decided we were going to start a family, working in the hospital setting was really trying and hard. You had to work weekends. You would be working shifts. So it could be nighttime, it could be daytime. So I decided to move more into private practice, which meant I was, set up an office in the community and was seeing patients that needed treatment as they came through your door. And the majority of the patients I was seeing at that point were patients who had eating disorders. And so this was a new challenge for me because those were patients that I didn't see as much in the hospital setting. So I had to do a lot of educating myself, a lot of work with peers who had more experience, just kind of honing my skills. There's a lot more counseling in working with those patients, and you're seeing them again and again and again. Whereas in the hospital, I would see people 2 or 3 times, or maybe longer if they were really ill and stayed in the hospital for a longer period of time. But in the community, I was really being able to forge relationships with patients who I was working with over and over again for months or even years at a time. So it just was an entirely different and very rewarding aspect of working with patients. And as I said, they were mostly patients with eating disorders. And that was very eye-opening for me because it really gave me a much greater awareness to certain aspects of our culture, of society, if you will, that I would argue is overly fixated on body size, dieting, being at a quote unquote healthy weight, this relentless messaging that we all get really from the time we're toddlers about what the perfect or ideal body is supposed to look like. And for certain people, that is really triggering and can cause them to go down this road where they're dieting all the time and just kind of in this relentless pursuit of the ideal, which is really something that none of us can ever achieve. And so from there, I started thinking more about what is the knowledge, what is the education that we could impart to younger people to prevent them from going down this eating disorder path? Like what do they need to understand? What are the messages that they could receive that might counteract the messages that they're getting relentlessly in our culture so that they could become more savvy and also understand the reality, which is that there's a tremendous diversity in body shapes and sizes and always have been, that your humans have very little ability to change their weight, their body weight in the long term. And that dieting is really a futile effort. And particularly for young people who are experiencing physical changes through puberty and things, and maybe feeling uncomfortable in their bodies, normalizing that, right? And not making them feel like something's gone wrong and that they then have to fix it, but that kind of body's growth and development and kind of change is a normal process throughout life. So that's really brought me to where I am today, where I spend most of my time working in classrooms, and I do some kind of nutrition, more traditional nutrition education for young people in middle school and high school. And I also do a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, like body image, but awareness, social media kind of investigation and analysis to break down some of these messages that we're getting and help young people be aware of kind of the faulty messaging and give them kind of the correct and more scientifically anchored information that potentially will help them navigate all these crazy messages they're getting and potentially change things in the future so that generations from now on are not going to have to, be so fixated on this diet culture that we know is just really harmful and also a waste of time, frankly.
Oh,
So I don't know if that was way too long, but
that's I think so fascinating, because it's, when you really think about it, food is just fuel, right? It just helps us get move throughout the day, but it's become so much more in our world. And I think nutrition and diet are really a means to an end. And to me, it's about good health.
Yep.
But it's so much more than that. It's social, it's family, it's pleasure, it's body image, it's society. There's so much that's unpacked. But I think if we come down to the basics, it's about good health, and that's a question I have for you: is how should we define good health from the aspect of food and this thing that we call fuel?
Sure. Well, I think you started to touch on, the many aspects, the many roles that food has in our lives. And that's so important to focus on. I think, to me, good health is really multifaceted, and it's so much more complicated, I think, than we're led to believe. I think society would lead us to believe that, quote unquote, good health is eating well and exercising and achieving or maintaining a healthy weight. And if we can do those things, like, we've achieved good health, gold star for all of us, et cetera. But the reality is that good health is so much more than that. Of course, wellness includes the foods we eat and how often we move our bodies. But we do know from countless research studies that weight-centered health, so health paradigms that center body weight as kind of the be-all, end-all of wellness, are completely bogus. So we know from countless research studies that bodies can be healthy at many sizes. And most often, bodies that are slightly larger actually have the best health outcomes. So this idea that thin automatically makes you healthy is completely false. And in the same vein, fatness or being fat is not necessarily making you unhealthy. So when I say bodies can be healthy at many sizes, that's totally true. It doesn't mean that bodies are healthy at every size, but it does mean that weight is not kind of the divining rod. What weight you're at does not automatically make you healthy or unhealthy. It's interesting, they did a research study out of Harvard, and it revealed that the two biggest predictors of longevity in people are social integration and friendships and personal relationships. So really what that's telling us is that people who lived the longest in this study of thousands of people were those who felt part of their community and those that had people in their lives that they could count on for love and support. So it didn't matter if they were thin or fat. It didn't matter if they ate all their veggies or not, or if, how much they exercised, how many hours in the gym they spent. Really what it came down to was whether or not people felt connected. And so this idea that our weight determines our health is just really something that I think slows us down and distracts us when there are so many other aspects that we need to be focusing on. So when thinking about good health, I think we really, diet and exercise are important, but we need to go beyond that. So we need to be thinking about, as you mentioned, mental health, physical wellness, which could include nutrition and movement, but also sleep, clearly access to healthcare, safe spaces to live, clean air to breathe and water to drink, friendships, support systems, access to education, access to jobs. And those are just to name a few that are really important factors. Many of these things are probably readily available to your listeners, but we do know that we have huge health disparities in our communities and across the country. And communities of color and poor communities oftentimes have less access to some of these things. So health is truly much broader, and wellness is more complicated than I think we're all led to believe.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. And the other thing I said this earlier, just sharing food and being part of breaking bread is such an important part of the human existence, I think. and it helps with relationships. So those people that are living longer may actually be eating very well, but they may be sharing meals with those family members and friends and staying engaged with people, and food helps us do that. It's just one of the tools.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
I always think that I'd rather be alive today than any other time in human history, although we got our challenges.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. But I think today we've got more advantages than any time that the humans have been around. This current and these future discoveries are going to only make it better, I think. We've got these challenges, but what do you see are the biggest obstacles from a health and wellness perspective that we should be thinking about?
So, I think at the risk of sounding like I'm, saying the same thing, but I think that one of the biggest obstacles from where I sit, okay, so from the groups of people that I work with and the students that I work with, is this fixation on weight-centered health. The medical system, I think, really has a preoccupation with telling people to lose weight. We use the BMI charts. Every time you go to the doctor, they measure you, they weigh you, and then they track your weight and height on a chart, and they tell you, if you're in a healthy range or not. And, we know that BMI is a faulty system. It should not be used the way it's being used. It was never intended for that. And so we're so fixated on putting people into classifications based on their weight. And I think this is really kind of one of the biggest issues, because it's, as I said before, it's a distraction. There's so much stigma around body sizes and how much people weigh. And I think it's a distraction. And I think it's not helpful, because we know that it's not a good indication of how healthy somebody is. So, the other piece of that is that it fuels this industry that's focused on dieting, selling you shakes and selling you supplements. And, we know that 98% of diets fail, and that people may lose weight initially, but 98% of people will gain all that weight back within 1 to 2 years, not be able to maintain that weight loss, and then feel like a huge failure, and then get back on the diet train again. The diet industry is $1 billion industry, and people are kind of kept on this perpetual like hamster wheel of like, okay, I got to get to a weight, and I'm going to do all these things to get there. And then I did it, and now I've failed, and now I have to do it again. I just feel like it takes so much energy, and our young people are being kind of sucked into that mechanism really at young ages. And it can be so damaging to them. So the time and the effort and the mental distress and the focusing that it takes away is wasted energy that I think could be redirected in so many other ways. So I think that the way that we're taught from a young age that thin is good and fat is bad, it's on TV, it's in shows that children watch, it's on mannequins at the mall, discussed on the news, glamorized on social media, you name it, it's everywhere. And we know that for young people, it is a serious issue for their mental health. And that, when young people get involved in dieting, we know there have been documented studies where children as young as 10 are starting to go on diets. And they're either diets that they themselves put them, start themselves, or that their parents initiate for them. And that dieting, particularly at a young age, is the number one risk factor for developing an eating disorder. So I think that the problem is that despite what we've been led to believe, humans have very little ability to effectively change their body weight in the long term. So it's futile. And yet we're constantly bombarded with it, with the next or the newest diet. And it's big business. So I think if from where I sit, that's the biggest problem I see. And if we could get rid of that, people would be able to pursue wellness from a place that actually made a difference, as opposed to focusing on weight, which we know has very little to do with how healthy you are.
So what can parents with young kids focus on when it comes to these health and nutrition issues, and then how do we educate parents and then kids about being healthy? from a eating and a lifestyle perspective? What can we do?
Yeah. So that's the $1 million question. And I just want to say that it is so hard to be a parent. I'm a parent. So I just want to acknowledge that every parent, every caregiver out there is doing their best. Many of us carry our own insecurities and biases about body weight or body image, the stuff that we were raised to believe, the stuff maybe that our parents even dealt with when they were growing up. So there's a lot out there. And it's really, really hard to let those things go when we're raising our own kids. The number one priority for me and the people that I work with and the kids I work with is to raise children who feel good in their own bodies and also who have a healthy relationship with food. So how do we do that? I think there are lots of good resources out there, and I'd be happy to provide you with kind of more specific lists offline, and you could share those with your listeners as you feel.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. But I think more generally, and these are in no particular order, but the things I think about are, when you're feeding children, that you're aiming to be very non-judgmental about food. So avoiding the urge to label foods good and bad, or healthy and unhealthy, or junk and healthy, because that is black and white thinking, and it also sets kids up to kind of feel badly if they're eating something that's supposedly bad for them. The other thing is providing access to all foods. So, and this can be tricky, right? Because we might think, okay, well, we can only give our kids access to the healthiest stuff. Well, sure, you want your kids to have access to healthy foods, but you don't want to villainize that package of Oreos or, the carton of ice cream in your freezer. Like, all foods are there. And getting back to something you said earlier, Peter, like food serve different roles, right? So some food may be there because it's food that helps our bodies grow. But there are also foods that are just delicious and bring us pleasure, or might be part of celebrations.
Like peppermint ice cream.
Like peppermint ice cream, right? There's nothing wrong with peppermint ice cream. So another thing that's really important is to resist the urge to comment on your body, on anyone's body, on your child's body, particularly negatively, but just generally avoiding kind of body comments is really a great way to go. Don't talk about needing to lose weight, or that you feel like you packed on a few pounds over the winter, or whatever it might be. Don't weigh yourself in front of your children or express feelings of body dislike. It doesn't mean you can't have them, because we're all human, right? We go through phases where we're happy or unhappy or with our bodies. Like that's a journey that we're all on. It just means keep it to yourself and do not pass that stuff on to your kids if you can avoid it. We don't want them to overhear things like that, because then they, if dad's saying that he's unhappy with the way his belly is looking, then kids are looking at their own bellies and wondering, should they be unhappy with the way their belly looks? So try to keep that stuff away from kids. Avoid commenting on how much people are eating, whether it's a lot or a little. Kids are really great at regulating how much food they need. They eat when they're hungry. They stop when they're full. They just are very intuitive eaters, which is kind of the gold standard, right? So there may be days where your child is starving and eats everything in front of them, and they're growing, right? So they have tremendous calorie needs at times. And then there are other times where they're not that hungry and they don't eat as much. Just, you can observe you can say, wow, gosh, you've been doing a lot of activity. It seems like you're really hungry today, right? Like, you don't have to be mute at the dinner table or at the counter or in the car, wherever you're eating, but avoid any sort of judgmental comments about what they're eating and how much. And, related to that is honoring child's autonomy when it comes to food. So if they say they're full, they can be full. Many of us grew up with the clean plate club, okay, well, you aren't finished with your dinner until you finish every single bite on your plate. Well, that's a really hard message to get if you're also trying to instill in children that they should listen to the way their body feels, right? Because if a child is saying to you, hey, I'm not that hungry. I don't want to eat anymore. And you're saying, well, just eat 5 more bites. You're basically telling them like, okay, ignore how your body's feeling and just cram more food into you. So that's, if you can avoid doing that, and that's a hard one to break, and that's a hard one to break with grandparents and with other people in your life as well. But to let kids stop when they're full and to eat when they're hungry is huge. Encourage movement for play and for fun, but not for exercise. And this is important for all kids. So oftentimes I talk to parents who have a child that they feel is overweight and they're worried about that child, right? And they might do things differently for that child than they would do, say, for the child's siblings who might not be overweight in their estimation. So that kind of singling out a child for what their body looks like and doing things differently for that child. So making that child exercise, or making sure that child doesn't get dessert, but the other kids can have dessert. Those kinds of things are really damaging and should be changed. And you know what? There are lots of specialists. There are lots of people out there that can help you with this. So if you're navigating things that are really tricky and you're not sure how to proceed, get help. Talk to your pediatrician. Seek out a registered dietitian, someone who knows how to navigate these tricky situations, because you don't have to go them alone. And there's lots of help out there. And the last thing I'd say is there's something called the division of responsibility, which is a concept that was developed by a pediatric registered dietitian nutritionist named Ellen Satter. And I think that it's one of the tenets that I've always stuck to throughout my life as a parent. And I think about a lot, even just with the work that I do now with kids and families. But the idea is that the parent or child caregiver's responsibility, parent or caregiver's responsibility, is to provide the food and the place in which it's consumed. And the child's responsibility is to decide what to eat and how much. And so if you can think about those divisions of responsibility and try to stick to them as much as possible, you're not going to be perfect. But if it can be kind of your guiding thought, then I think that sets you up for a place where you're respecting and following some of the ideas that I mentioned earlier.
You know, it just is so. These things are passed on from generation to generation, I think, and man, I'm hopeful my kids will forgive me for a lot of the things that you talked about. But that's how I grew up. I think a lot of us face that challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Leslie, are there? And I know you'll hate this question, but are there eating and nutrition rules of thumb that you recommend that we should consider?
So I would say, yeah, I mean, I'd say, eating regularly is a great one. Making sure you talked a little bit before about, if nutrition, it can be seen as fuel for our bodies. And that's certainly true. So, eating regularly, eating regular meals and snacks, not going too long without eating is always important. And in these hot days of summer, and goes for, drinking water and other hydrating fluids as well. Trying to incorporate lots of different colors and variety into the foods you're eating is easier during certain seasons than others. But I think, we know that different color foods have different nutrient profiles. So if you're eating lots of different colors, you're maximizing your exposure to lots of different nutrients. So that's always a good rule of thumb. Moving your body in ways that you enjoy. So if you hate trucking it out on the treadmill, don't do it. Like, find something that you like to do, because movement is important, right? It's great for our physical health, for our mental health, for sleep, so many things. So find something that you enjoy and do it as often as you can, in ways that feel manageable. And if you can only get in 5 or 10 minutes at a time, that's great too. It's great for stress relief and just taking a break from your screen or work or whatever you're doing. I think it's hard, right, for people my age, older, to embrace this idea that no foods are bad. But I really encourage people to honor your cravings. If you're really craving something, it means you should have it, and it means that you're spending way too much time thinking about it. So if you just eat it, it's better than like spending all this time thinking about it. But those are generally, I guess, my top ideas in terms of rules of thumb.
Yeah, I think I what I've learned over the years is just the rule of thumb for me is certainly moderate how much I eat, just because I don't need as much as I tend to want to eat, but also just reduce less processed foods. That's what, those are the things that I focus on. Does that make sense?
Sure. And I would say if that makes sense for you, that's great. I would say that processed foods serve roles for other people. I think the number one thing is to feed yourself. So if you're someone who is working crazy hours and has smaller people to feed, sometimes processed foods are going to do it for you, and it's going to make life easier, and it's going to get your kids the calories they need. I think it's all about balance. And I think it's, knowing where you're at and being able to work with what you have, right? So I don't mean to sound like I'm talking in circles, but generally, yes, eating fruits and vegetables is great. Frozen fruits and vegetables are probably more processed, but are packed with nutrition and are really easy for a lot of people and don't go bad as fast. So processed, I tend to stay away from that term just because most every food is processed, but I totally get where you're going with that. And I think that if you have exposure to lots of fresh stuff and you have time for it, amazing. And if you don't beat yourself up about that. Do the best you can with what you have. And the number one goal is just to feed yourself, right? Yeah. So then you move on from there.
Yeah, I love the term, a balance. Life is a balance.
For sure.
Yep. Yeah. There's so many diet fads out there, whether it's low carb or intermittent fasting or being a vegetarian or no dairy or gluten-free. Are any of these fads something we should embrace or avoid or just accept for what they are?
So I generally say any diet that its purpose is to help you lose weight is garbage. Sorry. Yeah. Any diet fad, whether it's intermittent fasting to lose weight or, going gluten-free to lose weight I think it's a waste of time, honestly. Incorporating some vegetarian meals into your life is fine. And I don't look at that as much as like if you're not doing it to lose weight, I'm totally good with it, because there's a lot of environmental reasons to eat more meat-free meals. And it's vegetarian and vegan food can be delish. So I'm all for that. I think there are people who need to eat gluten-free because they have celiac disease or gluten intolerance. That is legit. And if you're thinking that you're having a problem with malabsorption or something like that, then I would recommend that you meet with a dietitian, see a gastroenterologist to make sure that you're doing it right and that you're doing it for the right reasons. But anything that you're doing for weight loss, I would say, don't waste your time. You want to try to eat well and to take care of your body, but any of these things that you're doing for weight loss, I just think they're just, a lot of them are scams. Yeah. Most of them are scams because they're not going to work in the long term. So
it sounds so reasonable, to avoid these kind of fads, but they're out there, and we want to improve, we want to do better, and we grab onto things,
of course,
because it sounds good.
Totally. Yeah.
I think about a lot of, in our society, especially, so much of healthy lifestyle and living is available to those of us that are privileged, in our world. We get to live this low stress life. we have the opportunity to get lots of sleep. We can belong to gyms, and we have exercise equipment. We have time for those things. We can prepare balanced and healthy meals, and we can afford fresh fruits, and they're available to us, and all that. What are families and individuals that may have challenges in some or all these areas do? What do you recommend?
Yeah, these are very real concerns. I would say first, try not to stress and do what you can. So acknowledging where you're starting is the first step. I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but if for you just getting meals on the table or feeding people on a regular schedule is hard, start there and find easy solutions. So a peanut butter and jelly on whole grain bread and a glass of milk is a perfectly fine meal and also very inexpensive. If you feel you aren't getting enough fruits and vegetables, but you don't have access to tons of fresh stuff or farmers markets or what have you, try frozen fruits and veggies. They're half the price of fresh, sometimes even less than half the price. They last a whole lot longer. You don't have to worry about stuff rotting before you get to it. And they're a very easy and inexpensive way to get more fruits and vegetables into your life. If finding time for movement is hard, break it down. So getting 5 to 10 minutes of walking does wonders for blood pressure, for blood sugar levels, will help relieve stress and give you a break. So just figure out where you are, what your priority is, and starting there and then figuring out what might work for you is the best way to go. I always tell clients, pick one thing to start with. Don't try to change everything at the same time, because you're kind of setting yourself up for a hard road. It's easier to make some small changes and then build on those, as opposed to trying to overhaul everything all at one time. So, but again, there are people that can help you. There are great online resources. There are great people that you can see. A lot of dietitians now are still seeing people via telehealth. So you could see somebody, via Zoom, or speak to someone on the phone. And so a lot of this care is accessible now and is covered by insurance. And if people are struggling, that could be an additional way to think about getting some support.
Yeah, Leslie, I'm just struck by this conversation that we're having, and the advice that you're giving is so similar to conversations that I have with my clients about financial wellness. I think there's a lot of similarities. Wellness, whether it's financial or health, doesn't happen overnight. It takes a plan. It works when you think about your goals and you take the necessary steps to be successful. I think it's important to know the basics and helpful to have a coach or a guide or someone like you or me on the financial side. And then the other thing I think, and you said this maybe not exactly the same way, but just avoid beating yourself up on less than the optimal past decisions we've made, whether it's the extra serving or the fried food. Be kind to yourself, right? It's just
definitely.
Yeah. And then I think this is so important. Enjoy yourself once in a while, have that dessert and go on vacation. Spend your money, your capital, enjoy that meal that is special. Enjoy it with friends and family. So
I agree.
I think there's just a lot of tie-in, and I'm struck by how our conversations are so similar. Leslie, can our listeners reach out to you directly if they have any questions? And if so, how do they contact you?
Sure. So I can, give you my email, Peter, and people are welcome to email me if they have questions. That's really the best way to reach out to me right now.
Do you want to give that now?
Sure. It's Jackson, JACKSON .leslie, LESLIE @gmail.com.
Great. Well, and if any of our listeners want to reach out to me, And I can refer them to Leslie directly. So, Leslie, I thank you so much for this conversation. It's as I mentioned earlier, wellness is an important part of what we do, financial, emotional, spiritual, and just healthy. We want to be healthy. And I think what you do is so important. And I thank you for participating and being involved. And it was a great conversation. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Our pleasure.
Peter and Leslie, this has been fantastic. Peter, I know that I'm hoping that people reach out to Leslie and just have a conversation, right? I mean, because obviously what I'm hearing is that there's no judgment, right? It's just a discussion. It's just something that, hey, let's talk about it, talk about where you're at, where you want to go, and let's see what fits your lifestyle without falling into these fads and all the latest gimmicks and the things that you're seeing on social media or media. And again, that's the parallel that I drew from this conversation, Peter, with you, because people, they're getting inundated with fads and crypto this and, buy this next big investment. This is going to hit, $1 million for you in the next week. I mean, you don't want people getting suckered into that kind of stuff. So, like I said, I'm hoping people reach out to Leslie, but I also want people to reach out to you to get a wellness check on their finances, to see where they're at, because again, there's no judgment. It's just a discussion. Where do you want to go? What do you think you're going to need to do to get there? And let's talk about that. So if people want to have that discussion with you, Peter, can you give them your contact information one more time?
Yeah, probably the best thing to do is to go to my website at raskinplanning.com and reach out to us via our contact information there. And then also, I just want to say, Leslie, if you could send me a list of resources, that would be fantastic. And then I can post that on the website as well for people to see.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
Oh, thank you.
Well, this has been wonderful. And Leslie, I do appreciate you, giving me the thumbs up on the peppermint ice cream, because the way I feel about it is, look, it's fantastic. It makes me feel good. And it freshens my breath. I mean, that's all there is to it.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, it's all winning, right? It's all winning. Just portion control. That's what I'm working on. Anyway, thank you so much for being on the show, Peter. Of course, thank you so much for facilitating this and bringing her on the show. And our last thank you is always reserved for you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Wealth is in the Details podcast with Peter Raskin. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Peter comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this does actually help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Raskin Planning Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth is in the Details podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Lincoln Financial Advisors Corp. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Peter Raskin is a registered representative of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Securities offered through Lincoln Financial Advisors Corp., a broker-dealer, member SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through SageMark Consulting, a division of Lincoln Financial Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Insurance offered through Lincoln affiliates and other fine companies. Raskin Planning Group is a marketing name for registered representatives of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation and its representatives do not provide legal or tax advice. You may want to consult a legal or tax advisor regarding any legal or tax information as it relates to your personal circumstances.